Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're excited that you've joined us. Our topic for the webinar today is Get Your Secure Development Initiatives in Shape, a 30, 60, 90-day approach. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'll serve as your host and moderator for today's webinar. So a few housekeeping items we want to take care of before we begin. First, this webinar is being recorded. The recording and the slides from today's webinar will be available on devops.com, and we'll also send out an email with links to the content so everyone will be able to get this information after the webinar. We highly encourage questions for our speaker today. Our speaker loves questions, and we like to hear from you because it tells us the interest in the areas that you'd like to pursue in the conversation. So please put those into the GoToWebinar control panel. We've set aside some time at the end, a good chunk of time, so we look forward to handling those questions with you. Last but not least is we're awarding three $50 Amazon gift cards at the conclusion of the webinar. So please hang in there. We'll let everyone know who those three winners are. So let's quickly move now to our topic, Get Your Secure Development Initiatives in Shape, a 30, 60, 90-day approach. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Brad Smith, who's Senior Principal Security Program Manager at Veracode. Brad has a wealth of experience working with organizations, helping them secure their environments, and he has a wealth of knowledge from that actual experience, as well as being part of the product team at Veracode. So Brad, welcome to the webinar. I'm just going to hand the baton to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Mitch. And I appreciate everyone who has hopped onto this webinar today. My name is Brad Smith, and my role at Veracode is a consulting role to enable companies to make the changes necessary to have a successful application security program. So a lot of what I tried to do is have those high value conversations with enterprises out in the marketplace to make not only Veracode customers successful in using the solutions they've purchased, but the adoption of a platform and tools, but really work with all the stakeholders involved in the security initiatives of their organization to make them successful in their roles, in their reputation with their management, and in their relationships downstream with their internal customers they serve. So today I'm going to give an overview of the AppSec program landscape, including some of the problems that I see and how to address them. And you'll leave with a checklist of some hopefully practical items that you can take and start using in the next 30, 60, 90 days to make an impact on the application security of your company and software. But mostly I hope to just share some real world stories around the task at hand, so make it feel a little less daunting, let you hear what other peers, other people in the marketplace are experiencing and learn from them. Like Mitch said, we're going to talk about getting your secure development initiatives in shape. And there's a lot of application security programs that are out of shape. And the mistakes that I see organizations making around this are some of the same mistakes that I saw my young children making a few weekends ago when he was putting a puzzle together, and I came down and he was halfway through a 100-piece puzzle and couldn't find any more pieces to fit in. And when we looked at it closer, I saw that some of the dark colored shapes, this was like a outer space Star Wars puzzle. Some of those pieces had just been jammed in there. It looked like, it fit, but they didn't. And so that's what a lot of people try to do with security. They've got distributed, decentralized development teams, and they're just trying to jam in some requirements. We want to look at the big picture and look at how can you really integrate application security so that just becomes the way that software is developed. and how can that picture really add value to the organization as a whole. So a successful application security program is going to help your company comply with the regulations. deliver secure software at speed, reduce the risk of breach, and rapidly respond to events at scale. So it's important that you know the components of a successful program. I'm going to go full screen here so you can see the slide. If a program is slow, it's going to fail because that means that it's either expensive, you're delaying production, or you're losing a competitive edge, or it's risky. There's gaps in coverage. Program's also going to fail if it's isolated and it's not getting funded because it's not having that perception of adding value. And a lot of times that's because it's either not tied to an important project like digital transformation or a problem such as reducing the risk of a breach. And then stagnant programs are going to fail too. You need to grow to keep up with the threat landscape and the shifts in development and the proliferating application portfolio. Let's see. So it can be done, and we know how to do it successfully. With thousands of customers who have been successful, it really comes down to some key ingredients. And there's no end to the number of tasks or activities that you can execute against. If you don't have that game plan with those key ingredients, you're going to be off direction. You're not going to get those positive business outcomes. So we're going to review these key ingredients and look at some of the pitfalls that are common that keep people from getting there. So you can be prepared to address those before they come and reach your goals. By the end of this, you'll have an idea of what initiatives to think about over the next quarter, regardless of what phase of maturity your application security program in. And I'm not just talking to companies and people who are thinking about starting an application security program or initiatives from scratch. If your organization's been running an AppSec program for a decade, I trust you'll still find some value here. No matter what stage your program is in today, from just launching to 7, 8 years old, we're going to review how the changing development methodology comes into play, how this idea of DevSecOps and having a software factory, CI/CD pipelines can be something to help organizations move faster, how a program around writing secure software can add business value to an organization, and how you can keep it growing year over year. So hopefully every stakeholder, whether you're a developer, a release management engineer, a cybersecurity architect, you'll walk away with an understanding of not just how your role plays, but how everything ties together. And speaking of stakeholders, if you've ever been a stakeholder in the application security program, then you and I have something in common. And we probably both at some point realized that this is a complex and challenging problem. And we thought, how can this be done? So how mature is the average application security program? I'm going to quote something that I heard from an industry analyst about a week or two ago. And she said, when you look at application security, it's the worst, and it has been the worst for the past few years. And that the data behind that sentiment was, if you look at the methods of breaches over the last 2 years, you're still seeing weaknesses like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and you're still seeing vulnerabilities in known or newly disclosed components. And the analyst was kind of pointing to the root cause was that developers aren't being taught about security. And at the top 40 computer science universities in the United States, they did some research and they found really one class that was dedicated to teaching secure software design as part of their requirements. And the scenario wasn't much better in the United Kingdom. So companies are setting up these AppSec programs to address insecure software. And earlier this year, I was looking at kind of doing a gap analysis for a large enterprise to see how they were doing with writing secure code, and it was failing, and it wasn't moving, it wasn't growing, even though this was a large company with a lot of resources. And I was talking to one of my colleagues, and he responded. I think he had a great perspective, and really caught on the key. And what he had said was that, the reason for this company it's failing and for these developers is, bottom line, it's easier for them to do nothing than to develop secure code, to remediate that secure code. And I thought that really sums it up. It talks to the culture of the organization. It talks to the lack of inertia that causes programs to fail, the competing priorities that take precedence, the lack of an executive mandate, saying this needs to get done, lack of reporting and metrics to really know what the risk is and what's out there, on the education and so on and so forth. So for the sake of this conversation, I put up kind of 4 buckets of 4 types of programs. And I think that we can kind of use this as a model as we talk. And we can look at the current state of your application security initiatives and see where they fall into the spectrum of these kind of 4 common approaches. And then I can talk to what are the key things you need to do in each approach to get to the next level. So if you're kicking around, the tires on a brand new AppSec program, or if you're trying to reinvigorate an existing one, maybe you're trying to turn the ship and change the culture and take the existing program to the next level. I'm going to give you some tangible activities and guidance that can help with some strategy. So we're going to talk about, not just the technical CWEs and tools and issues, but really around also looking at the culture of the development, the secured organizations, InfoSec, other teams. Think about the risk tolerance of an organization. How are the programs going to get funded? What's the maturity, not of the AppSec program, but of the different development groups? What do you do in the first 90 days of each approach to have a more mature and comprehensive program, and taking a holistic look? A lot of times I hear that companies are saying we're doing DevOps or we're doing DevSecOps, and what they mean by that is they're starting to move towards automation, scanning faster, part of a pipeline, baking all the process into the code. But when I ask them, are you fixing vulnerabilities? They'll say, we're not really remediating. We're scanning every day, multiple times, but we're not fixing vulnerabilities. And my argument is, is that really DevSecOps? If we have this idea of DevOps being a kind of this continuous improvement, learning feedback loop, remediation is a key piece that we need to make sure is part of that, not just a lot of scanning. So I'm going to double click on the reactive approach. So many companies are taking a reactive approach to information security and specifically application security. And that's part of the reason I'm in this industry. I was attracted to the Veracode because of kind of the unique solution Veracode has in terms of automated static binary analysis to address the problem. For many years, prior, I worked as a manual penetration tester. So I would do security reviews on all sorts of things, but a lot of applications, and really only would work on one application a week or two. So in an entire year, maybe I got through 25 applications. And this testing, it wasn't integrated into the software development life cycle at all. It was ad hoc, it was reactive, it was manual. So when I joined Veracode about 7-8 years ago, my first quarter here, I remember having a goal to onboard 90 applications at one customer, working with them for static testing. And in that first quarter, we were able to get about 80. So we didn't really hit our goal, but it was still a great feeling. We were maturing and speeding up and improving. And sure, this still complemented manual penetration testing, but the bulk of the testing has been automated. And so the manual pen testers could focus on the things that are interesting, that they want to do. There's opportunity cost savings there. And then shortly later, after that first quarter, I was working with another customer, and they were a financial company. They had a really kind of centralized, standardized process. And we found that all their software was going through a single build server. And so we plugged that in, the APIs, and we were able to kick off 100 applications scanning in flight simultaneously without the developers having to do anything. And that was really cool. It felt like no longer are we reactive, but we're being proactive. We're scaling. From a professional level, it made me feel like I was contributing more. I think it really affected the quality of the software analysis for that customers. So getting customers out of that reactive approach and maturing is why I'm in this industry, and starting to think about how does automated analysis fit into this. Is moving faster is going to be important. Just this cost savings from shortening the testing cycle from maybe 2 weeks to an automated scan a lot of times outweighs whatever investment in the tools in the program from the organization's perspective. So if you can show that value and identify the business driver behind it, then you're going to be set up for growth. And the first thing we tell everyone when you're just standing up kind of a formal application security program is you want to obtain an enforceable executive mandate. Something that says developers have to do this. You don't want to be in the position of just kind of herding cats, so to speak, where you're just trying to get people to do things. But you have that top-down approach, and then you have the bottom-up approach where you're bringing tools to bear on the problem that the developers can benefit from. You're going to have a good recipe there. A lot of times we're just looking at top priority applications here, perhaps applications that are the brand ones bringing in the most revenue, or maybe the top 10 applications on your disaster recovery list. Or frankly, a lot of times it's the teams that the security group has a good relationship with. They're friendly. Whoever we can get into the program, let's get going here. But I've seen a lot of customers. I think of one company in the entertainment industry, which they didn't have that centralized approach like the financial industry. In fact, they were completely distributed, a lot of small teams, development teams, a lot of acquisitions, and they were doing a lot of really kind of publicity type events. And I remember there was one special event one summer where they made some applications specifically for this sporting event. And the application security team actually had to go on site and run their program out of a hotel room where the event was. And part of that was the nature of the app, but part of it was a real-time kind of reactive approach. Like if something goes wrong, we need to be here to make sure that these applications are secure. So if you're in this stage, great, you've got a foothold. But these are some of the things that you want to think about to move to the next level. And that's the baseline approach. This is the stage that I see most companies at. A few years ago, I was helping a manufacturing company kind of kick off their AppSec program. And I was talking to the CISO. He described his perspective of it as kind of like a air traffic controller. They wanted to line up all the planes to get them ready to launch, right? You got all these different development teams, these factories, they're loading up their cargo at the gates, they're getting ready to ship. And you want to make sure that the software is launched in a secure manner. A lot of times here, to be successful, you need to start thinking about the culture. Think of it as turning a ship. It's large, it's slow, but once you get it going, there's a lot of momentum behind it. You want to start moving away from the end of the software development lifecycle and integrating earlier into it. Moving beyond just the critical apps, thinking where are the areas that we don't know what our risk is, and getting a baseline approach, and setting that expectation with developers. Like we're going to see what this app looks like, but then we'll come back and talk to you and we'll put a plan together around it. The challenges here is a lot of companies don't know what apps they have. And so we'll talk about the application inventory in a few slides, but that's a critical piece, one of the common pitfalls that can delay programs. And I remember back to, I think it was the Super Bowl. There was a company that was running a commercial on it, and they had an app that in their commercial they were sending people to register or watch, follow up or something. And I remember in November, December, before, about a month and a half before, working with this company, getting the app through kind of the initial phase of their AppSec program, identifying a couple issues, getting those fixed, and the team launching the app on time. And it was a mini success story internally for this company that was really just starting this baseline approach. And it went successful, and the leadership of that company leveraged that, and they sent out kind of an internal press release to the about 600 IT employees in the company saying, congratulations to this development team for launching successfully on time and also launching securely. And it became a good announcement for the new AppSec program. Not only did it work, but teams were writing better code for it. It wasn't slowing them down, and they were getting recognition for it. And that kind of set the tone there and made it easier for other teams to follow and jump onto that. Now we're moving away from the skateboard to the bike and the icons here to the expanded approach. And this happens when you start to realize that AppSec isn't something that's bolted on to the end of a process, but it's something that integrates into the technology, the process, and even the people in terms of a mindset shift. To be successful here requires tying in your AppSec program into a specific project or problem of the organization. So if, for example, your organization is going through a digital transformation, migration to the cloud, where you're refactoring applications or moving applications from a monolith to microservices, or if it's simply just a database migration, or perhaps there's a problem, perhaps you've been breached, or there's an application that has had a security issue and now you need to fix, see where else am I exposed. Those are the type of things that an application security program can tie into to affect that culture change, but also to accelerate those initiatives. And so I see a lot of companies where they've got two tracks: legacy applications that they're still maintaining, and then kind of their next gen applications. So integrating into the CI/CD pipeline, automating this, making security kind of like air, invisible to the developers. you're starting to get a grip around some of the things that maybe you don't have control over, like how many applications do we have as a company, building those relationships with the teams that are responsible for tracking those. And then focusing on growth, scaling up this repeatable process that you have, maybe putting a framework in place and really driving remediation to the point where it's owned by the developers. So themes that are driving companies today to expand their approach is the idea of scaling. There's such a proliferation of applications. Any company that uses software is going to have to think about this. Even companies that pay someone else to manage their cloud or their S3 buckets or their software is going to have to hold those vendors to standards of application security. We can see the damages that are caused by that just by listening to news. Another theme is just this idea of simplifying security for developers to use the tools. Frankly, a lot of security tools and platforms are overly complex, and developers don't want to deal with complex tools as they're writing code. They would rather solve complex engineering problems. Let's make the security piece of it simple and easy for them. So it's something that they can bring to bear on the problems and help them go faster. And obviously speed, right? There's always going to be a trade-off between coverage and of security and speed. And really having an opinion on that is important. If you're scanning dozens of times a day, then perhaps you might want a scan that can go faster, but maybe it's just looking at it's not doing a full coverage, and then you complement that with a scan that's going to get you that full coverage of the application, but maybe takes a little longer. Lastly, the advanced approach is when you start to get a grasp on the threat landscape, that it's always changing, and you're going to have to be nimble and flexible to make sure the risks are covered. And an AppSec program is never going to reach the advanced stage without proactive planning to avoid the pitfalls that entrap so many leaders, developers. And as I've spoken to my peers at Veracode, some of the other program managers, I think we can boil this down to 3 or 4 kind of critical pitfalls that companies who have advanced programs, they've learned how to avoid these things. So the first one is the lack of an enforceable mandate. And a piece of this is having an escalation path. So when a development team is onboarded and they scan an application and you find some critical vulnerabilities, they typically will have some guidance around you have, X number of days to fix these. And, so you let the teams work within those guidelines to get those addressed, get a clean scan. But if they fall outside of that SLA, say it's 30 days, what's the next step? Who do you escalate to? You go to the dev lead. Is there someone on the information security side? Once they have a conversation, and you understand why this isn't being remediated, if you have a plan in place, good, put some dates around it. But if you don't, if it's just getting kicked down the road, who do you escalate to next? Does it eventually make its way up to the CISO or the CIO or someone who can enforce that team whether it's holding up a release or comparing teams, stack ranking, or some other technique. We want to have that top-down visibility and support. Second, unknown application inventory has held up security programs from growing for years because teams don't know how many apps they have. And it causes them to underfund programs because they might only plan to scan 50 apps or 300 apps, but you find that you have 700 or 1,100. And now you're trying to prioritize or put the brakes on all the momentum you've built and not able to serve developers. And it could mean you're not scanning the applications that have the most risks to the organization. So that's important to have whether it's you have a CMDB or some inventory or database, you got to get a grip, you got to get a handle on what are the applications, where are they, what languages are they written in, who are the owners, and things like that. And maybe the AppSec program starts to drive that. You can't be onboarded to the program until your application is registered in the inventory, or vice versa. So you want to be thinking about that. And competing development priorities are never going to go away, especially if you have a backlog of issues, a lot of security technical debt. You want to think about when we find those, say, high severity cross-site scripting vulnerabilities on a website that's already been in production and we don't have any developers assigned to that website, how are those going to get fixed? And if you have an advanced approach or you've got a good program with metrics and that top-down support, I've seen companies where they can go up even to the CEO and say, hey, here's the risk we have. Here's how much it would cost to get some extra developers to focus just on remediation, and they get that funded. And, that's not a good spot to be in. You want to get those things fixed before they're released, but you're going to run into that if your company's been around and you have any software for any amount of time. And then program bottlenecks. There's a lot of bottlenecks there, especially as older companies and teams where maybe they're used to more of a manual approach or the reactive approach where you've got, maybe they were only doing 20 apps a year and there was one person who was testing them all. That's not going to scale as you go to 50, 100 apps and more. So you want to make sure that developers are equipped to self-service and plug in the tools, their pipeline, get that scanning happening, and not require a single person to be in the critical path for onboarding, for approving mitigations, or remediation coaching, helping the developers fix the vulnerabilities. So that summarizes what I kind of wanted to highlight across the 4 approaches. And I hope that you have an idea of what stage your program is in. I recommend you get an independent third-party view of your current organization and build a plan around that. I want to give a checklist of items that get you thinking. And here's what you should be focused on each stage in my opinion, my experience. You're in the reactive stage. You need to get out of the reactive mode and start working towards getting a baseline of your current exposure and risk across a larger scope of programs. This means having a defined process that's repeatable and scalable. And we can highlight the executive mandate here. Start there. We can also highlight integration, and onboarding. If you're starting something new, then why not start with the automated process and get the plugins, get the APIs going so that the level of effort just to get that baseline scan is very low. A baseline approach to review, that's the systematic approach where you've got a repeatable process that's concise, it's documented, it's easy to follow, and you can easily go from 50 apps to 300. Here, I want to focus on remediation. Remediation is key because you're scaling, you're getting a lot of scans, and you're doing these baselines, and you're starting to see where the issues are, which business units are maybe more vulnerable in terms of the software they're writing, and you want to make sure those are getting fixed. And it's silly to think that a development team who's writing insecure code is going to know how to fix that code without any help or training. And so a key piece to a program is having some remediation expertise, whether that's remediation coaching or consultation calls. That's one of the things that Veracode includes is a developer can join a WebEx with a secure development coach. They can look at the report, look at their code, and show them how to fix the vulnerabilities. And so you're not just relying on that single person on the AppSec team to know all the different languages you're writing and all the different issues. You can partner with these remediation advisory consultants here. And then having the escalation process is going to be important because you'll quickly find that, hey, we did a baseline 2 quarters ago and the team hasn't fixed anything because they don't have, they got competing priorities. So you need to have those infrastructure in place where you can have the risk-based conversations. When I'm working with consulting with a company, I'm not the one who's going to be making those risk-based decisions. I'll be essentially auditing them and saying, hey, here's the areas where you have the most exposure or the areas for the biggest win to actually mature your program. And then, but you got to have someone who can make that decision and say, yeah, that's where we're going to direct our resources and our focus. On the expanded approach here, we're really looking to address the gaps in the program. So you've got something that is established, you've got a track record, you've got some successes, perhaps some lessons learned, and you've got a clear idea of where are the gaps, not only in your analysis types. Think about the analysis types. You got static application security testing, dynamic application security testing, software composition analysis, and your third-party components, open source components, and RASP and Greenlight and DevOps scanning. So manual penetration testing. So a lot of companies have been testing what we refer to as their first-party code, the code they're writing, but they're not fixing things in their third-party code, these kind of branded known vulnerabilities. So maybe you're expanding to get that included. And then you're also moving away from manual testing towards more automation. So that's why even getting that automation done earlier is gonna really be helpful. Lastly, the advanced approach. You've got a handle on your application inventory, knowledge of your full app inventory. You've got the ability to get that full coverage, both across your applications and across all the analysis types. So with digital transformation and the shifts in the development methodology, now is really a great time to take that next step in building your application security program. And I hope that you found this a helpful framework or model to think about the larger picture and how this can be not only a valuable program that you run inside your organization, but something that can move both the security and the culture and your position forward in a positive way, maturing, that's adding value. So at this point, I will turn it back over to the moderator. If we have any questions, I'm happy to address those.
Great. Well, thank you, Brad. We definitely do have some questions that have come in. So let's start with this one. Why should development teams be eager to participate in and help advance their organizations in their AppSec programs? What's the incentive for the development teams?
Yeah. So AppSec's a culture change, and if the development organization is used to viewing security as an afterthought, a lot of times you're going to get resistance from developers because they're measured on velocity and they view this as something that's slowing them down. But when I talk to developers, the truth is that they would rather know about their security flaws as soon as possible so that they have more time to fix them and fewer to fix. No one wants to scramble before a release date to address, this technical security debt. And so the security tools in the platform that exist, they're aids to help developers address the problem of how to deliver secure software at scale and at speed. And security should be viewed as the same way that you would look at, why would, as a developer, you write tests, or why would you want quality code? Security should be part of what developers do rather than an add-on. And the security tools need to get better. Developer usability and user experience is important. Many of the tools are too complex, but with these APIs, with these platforms, with Vericode's SaaS-based solution, we've been able to see that scale and that complexity kind of go away. Developers don't want to maintain an infrastructure of security tools, so that's something that by taking off their plate can make this a more valuable experience for them. And so, I think AppSec can be an enabler of both helping developers write code faster and also freeing up their kind of mind share, so to speak, to focus on those harder engineering problems that are going to add that business value.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Next question that we have is, in your opinion, what is the most neglected component of an application security program in regards to DevSecOps?
That would be remediation, actually fixing the flaws. Having that continuous loop or learning of feedback of an improvement. Some of these companies are really good at finding flaws, but they don't fix them, and it just turns their ignorance into negligence. One of the most critical parts of fixing flaws is finding them as they're discovered, not just scanning. So you want to be improving your fix rate. Think of it in terms of fix rate, flaw aging. How many days is a flaw open before it's fixed is critical to achieving those right results. So what's the problem we're seeing today in the industry? If you look at the State of Software Security report, 70% of flaws remain open after 1 month of discovery. 55% of those are still open 3 months after discovery. And we're not just talking about low and medium flaws, we're talking about high severity flaws with high levels of exploitability. So how do we address this problem and how do we think about it? We have seen that teams that are using DevOps practices, they do have a higher rate of fixing. So getting that automation in there, proper CI/CD practices, implementing security there, it can reduce the time it takes for a developer to fix or remediate flaws because they're getting that immediate feedback. So, yeah, where do we start? I think is just getting security earlier, but making sure you have remediation as part of that process. Scanning faster without fixing flaws is a trap that we see people fall into. And so one of the most valuable teams that I work with is our remediation coaching team. They're on-demand help for security, on-demand help, this team of security consultants that help developers reduce flaws in real time. We've seen big uptick in e-learning, and just having that practical day-to-day hand-holding and teaching, instructor-led training, secure program workshops, having secure engineers, champions within the organization are all parts of remediation. Fixing the issues that are out there, I think that's one of the most neglected components.
Okay, great. Another question we have, you had mentioned things like mandates, sponsors, things like that. Who is the best, most effective sponsor for an organization for an initiative like that? Is it the CISO? Is it the CIO? Is it the CEO that help align priorities of the teams, or someone at a lower level? Where do you find the most effective sponsors for an AppSec program?
Yeah, the title, it depends. I don't see the same title across companies because people have different titles, but you want someone who can get things done. I use this analogy of turning a ship. You need someone who knows the organization, who can, who's maybe had some success in other projects outside of AppSec even, that they've been able to get things done. They can get the funding, they can put the infrastructure in place, they have the relationships, and you want to build governance around that. So, it may be the IT organization, it may be the CISO, it could be someone who's more of a VP level, but you want to make sure that there's that governance piece in place, that you know who you're reporting up to, you know what type of metrics they're looking for and the frequency around that. Mm-hmm. And that person needs to have, at the end of the day, I would say, line authority over or influence on the development organization. So we've seen companies where the security, the VP has said, this is what we're going to do, but development hasn't bought into it. And so in that case, I would say the mandate isn't high enough because the development organization is giving reasons why they can't fix things this year, and there's no lever there to really address that. So it does depend, but I think it's going to be somewhere that both development and both the security teams roll up into, and you want buy-in on both of those sides.
So probably less about title and more about who's the right person that can do those things.
Exactly. I think you want to have the right person, and then you want to have the executive leadership aware of what's happening and supporting that.
Wonderful. Let's go on to the next question. What are some of the strengths of IDE plugins? I assume they're talking about plugins that would find security flaws in code as you're writing them versus automated frequent code scanning. What are the strengths of each? And also, if you had to start one area, where would you start first?
Yeah, I think they're complementary tools. in your IDE, if you're working in Visual Studio or Eclipse, a lot of times you can get plugins that will give you tooltips right away if you're using insecure functions. And so most of those are just working on a portion of the code, say the file that you have open. So they're finding a subset of the vulnerabilities, but they're finding them quick and at a time when the developers can fix them. So those are going to reduce the number of vulnerabilities. Then the next step is when a developer checks in code, you could have a real quick scan plugged into that just looks at the delta. So if you check something into say GitLab, you have a quick scan against the code that has changed between commits. That's another complementary step that can be configured to give feedback to the developers while they're still working and thinking about it. Then once something's committed to their repo, typically you have a build server that's integrating the application maybe as a whole or as a piece. And that's another area where you can do a more comprehensive scan to get more coverage. And what I've seen is in the past, development's really changed. Even a few years ago, you had some applications where they were maybe being updated twice a year. And so if you did a quarterly scan, you'd scan 4 times a year, that was fine. And that model doesn't work with, the newer, quicker releases where you're scanning multiple times a day. For one, you find that a lot of the post-processing of just matching flaws to previous scans adds time and maybe isn't really necessary. If you've done 12 scans a day for a year, maybe you don't need to know how those flaws match, from the previous year. Maybe you just want to know what's there and fixing it. And so being able to put different stages, integrate into different stages of the SDLC's importance, I would say, so what I've done is I've put together kind of a tool matrix for teams. So we've gone on a roadshow, met different dev teams, identified the tools they're using, and mapped out, all right, here's all the security platform and tools that we can bring to bear on your environment. And maybe it's a plugin, maybe it's the repo scanning, maybe it's the full static scan, using things like a developer sandbox where they can do scans by themselves without it reporting up and rolling into the security team is important, because then they'll do scans, they'll fix everything, and then they'll promote that clean scan up, and they don't feel threatened like they're going to be caught off guard or surprised by anything. So I think IDE plugins are good, and I would also look at a lot of the APIs that you can plug in further downstream as well.
Very good. Another question, and I remember that you had mentioned your remediation team as a resource, but the question here is, what are some of the resources available to developers for learning good secure coding practices?
Yeah, so there's things like OWASP, the top 10 vulnerabilities. They have a lot of resources. There's certification that you can get. There's vulnerability databases. You can look up flaws by a CWE number and kind of get a dictionary of what that flaw is and example code. But I would, if you're a developer and you have some ability or skill to write secure code, that's something that can really, make not only the job more interesting for you, but help you stand out in being able to contribute more. Starting to identify security champions within development teams who can help train, mentor, pass along those skills to their peers is going to be important. So, but yeah, I mean, I remember taking a class on application security in college, but a lot of developers we're seeing, aren't getting trained on that. And so looking at these resources online is good, and trying to institutionalize that in the form of security champions within a program. If you're a developer and you went to your your application security team and said, hey, I want to be in this role of a security champion and start helping others, they would absolutely love that.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're coming up on the end of our time here. I'd like to thank you, Brad, very much for an excellent presentation and sharing your insights and knowledge that you've gained from your working with customers and working in the industry. Appreciate it very much. I'd like to also announce now our winner of our 3 Amazon gift cards. So congratulations go out to Anne Marie F., Manu S., and Ronnie A. So congratulations. Checks in the mail, I guess gift cards in the mail. It's a more appropriate way to say it. So congratulations on winning the Amazon gift cards. So just a reminder to everyone that today's webinar recording and the slides will be available on the devops.com site, as well as we'll send you an email with links to those resources. And also remember to check out devops.com to find out more exciting webinars that are coming up on the schedule. So join me in thanking today's speaker, Brad Smith from Veracode. Brad, excellent job, and thank you for your presentation. And we'd like to thank you, your audience, for spending your valuable time with us as well. It's been my pleasure to host the podcast for you today. Everyone have a great day.